A woman in Phoenix, Arizona stood in her kitchen in February 2024 and did the math on a single grocery receipt. She had bought the same items she bought every 2 weeks for 11 years. Same store, same brands, same list. The total was 61% higher than it was in 2020. She did not change her lifestyle. She did not add anything new. She just kept buying what her family needed to eat. And in 4 years, the cost of that identical list had climbed by more than half. She stood there with the receipt in her hand for a long time. Not because the number was surprising, because it was not. Let that specific image land before we proceed. Because that woman is not an outlier. She is not a data point in an economist's quarterly report. She is the story that is happening in tens of millions of American households right now, quietly at checkout counters and kitchen tables, in the gap between what people earn and what it costs to keep their families fed. And the conversation that should be happening in response to that reality is not the conversation that most people are having. Most people, when they think about food security and hard times and preparing for economic pressure, go immediately to the wrong place. They think about stockpiling everything. They think about filling a basement with canned goods and freeze-dried buckets and protein bars and emergency ration kits that cost $400 and contain enough food to technically sustain a human body for 90s. Days in a way that will make those 90 days feel like a punishment rather than a survival. They spend money they do not have on food products they will not eat, organized in systems they will not maintain, for scenarios they have not thought through with any precision at all. This video is about the precise opposite of that approach. This is about the 4 foods, not 4 categories, not 4 food groups, not 4 general principles, 4 specific foods that the science of human survival, the mathematics of caloric density, the economics of Kobeisdzo, documented history of what Pewley ate during the worst economic contractions in American history all converge on as the foods worth stockpiling when money is tight and the future is uncertain. Everything else, and I mean this with complete analytical seriousness, is a waste of money that the people watching this video cannot afford to waste. Here's the framework before we get to the 4 foods, because the framework matters as much as the list, and without it, the list is just a shopping recommendation with no foundation. When economists study how ordinary families respond to sustained economic pressure, not a single bad month, but the kind of grinding multi-year economic contraction that changes purchasing behavior permanently, they find a consistent pattern in the food category. Families do not eliminate food spending. They cannot. But they restructure it around a small number of high-calorie, high-nutrition, low-cost staples that form the foundation of every meal. The fancy items disappear. The convenience items disappear. The variety disappears. What remains is the core, the foods that have fed human populations through wars, depressions, famines, and economic collapses across every culture on Earth for 10,000 years. Those foods share specific characteristics. They are calorie dense, meaning they deliver significant energy per pound and per dollar. They are nutritionally complete in combinations, meaning together they cover the macro and micro nutritional requirements that keep a human body functional under stress. They are shelf-stable for extended periods without refrigeration or special storage equipment. They are versatile enough to form the base of dozens of different meals, which matters more than most people realize, because food monotony is one of the primary reasons emergency food stockpiles fail. People stop eating what they stockpiled because they cannot face eating it again. And they are available in bulk quantities at prices that make genuine stockpiling financially realistic for families who are already under economic pressure. 4 foods meet all of those criteria simultaneously. The rest do not. And the money spent on the rest is money that cannot be recovered when it matters most. Let us begin with the first food. And I want you to understand why this particular food is first, not because of alphabetical order or arbitrary ranking, but because of a specific calculation that changes how you think about food value entirely. In 1932, at the absolute bottom of the Great Depression, American families who maintained food security through that economic catastrophe shared a common pantry item more than any other. It was not canned goods, it was not preserved meats, it was rice. Specifically, white rice, not because white rice is nutritionally superior to brown rice, but because white rice has a shelf life measured in decades under basic storage conditions, while brown rice, because of its higher oil content in the bran layer, goes rancid within 6 to 12 months, even in cool, dry storage. That distinction matters enormously when we are talking about genuine stockpiling rather than short-term food rotation. Brown rice is better for you if you are eating it fresh. White rice is better for your stockpile because white rice stored in an airtight container in a cool, dry location will remain fully edible and nutritionally intact for 25 to 30 years. Now, that is not marketing language from a food storage company. That is the documented shelf life data from food science research conducted at universities, including Brigham Young University's food storage research program, which has been studying long-term food preservation for decades and has tested rice samples stored under basic conditions across multi-decade timeframes. 25 years. A bag of white rice you buy today will be edible and nutritious the year your children graduate from college. Think about what that means for the economics of stockpiling. You are not buying food that expires in 2 years and creates a rotation problem where you have to constantly use and replace your stockpile at full retail price. You're making a one-time purchase that sits in your storage until the moment you need it, regardless of when that moment arrives. Now, let us talk about caloric economics. A 5-pound bag of white rice at a typical American grocery store costs between $4 and $6 depending on brand and location. That 5-pound bag contains approximately 11,000 calories. 11,000 calories. To put that in context, an adult human requires roughly 2,000 calories per day to maintain basic body function. A 5-pound bag of rice? Caloric requirements for one adult, purchased for under $6. In a 25-pound bag purchased at a warehouse store like Costco or Sam's Club, the price per pound drops further, and you're looking at 55,000 calories for somewhere between $15 and $20. There is no emergency food product on the market. No freeze-dried system, no dehydrated bucket, no meal kit designed for survival situations that comes within a factor of 3 of that caloric value per dollar spent. Nothing. The freeze-dried industry has built a multi-billion-dollar business on the anxiety that the people who actually need to think about food security feel when they think about hard times. And that industry's products have their place for certain very specific scenarios. But when a family in economic distress is looking at a limited budget and trying to build genuine food security, those products are not the answer. Bulk white rice is the answer. It always has been. But rice alone is not enough. And here's where the nutritional architecture of the 4-food system becomes important to understand. White rice is an excellent source of carbohydrates. Your body's primary fuel source, the energy that keeps your brain functioning and your muscles moving and your immune system operating. It contains some protein and very small amounts of fat. What it does not contain in significant quantities is complete protein, healthy fats, and the micronutrient spectrum that your body needs to avoid deficiency diseases over extended periods. The people who lived through the Great Depression on rice and little else developed nutritional deficiency problems. Pellagra, beriberi, the specific diseases of extreme dietary restriction that remind us that calories are not the same as nutrition. This is why the 4-food system is a system. Each food covers what the others lack. Together they form something close to a complete nutritional picture. Separately, they are incomplete. This is the design principle that the entire approach rests on. Store white rice, store it in bulk, store it in 5-gallon airtight containers with oxygen absorbers if you want maximum shelf life, or in the sealed bags it comes in from the warehouse store if you are rotating through it faster than 5 years. Buy the 50-pound bags when they go on sale. The price per calorie at that quantity is essentially irreducible. You will not find more food energy for less money in any other form. There is a woman named Maria who grew up in rural Mexico in the 1960s and now lives in San Antonio, Texas. Her family fed 8 children on a farm that produced very little cash income during years of drought and crop failure. She describes those years with a clarity that only someone who has actually navigated food scarcity can bring to the description. And when she talks about what kept her family alive and functional through the worst of it, she does not describe anything complicated. She describes 2 things: corn tortillas and black beans. Every day, in various combinations, with whatever was available to add flavor and variety. But the foundation was always the same. What Maria's family had discovered through necessity is what nutritional scientists later confirmed through research, that rice and beans together form a complete protein. This is the specific scientific fact that makes the combination of food 1 and food 2 not just economical, but genuinely nutritionally powerful. When you eat rice and beans together, the amino acid profiles of the 2 foods complement each other in a way that provides your body with all 9 essential amino acids, the ones your body cannot synthesize on its own and must obtain from food. Rice is high in the amino acids that beans lack. Beans are high in the amino acids that rice lacks. Together, they deliver complete protein comparable in quality to meat. This is not a coincidence. This is why rice and beans appear as a dietary foundation in virtually every food culture that developed before the era of global food distribution. Mexican rice and beans, Indian dal and rice, Japanese rice with edamame, West African rice and black-eyed peas, red beans and rice in Louisiana. Every cuisine, every culture, every geography that relied on plant foods as its primary nutrition source arrived at the same 2 food combination through the specific logic of what works. They did not have nutritional science. They had 10,000 years of observational evidence about what kept people alive and functional. Now let us talk about the economics of dried beans with the same precision we applied to rice. A 1 pound bag of dried black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, or lentils at an American grocery store costs between $1 and $2. A 1 pound bag of dried beans, when cooked, produces approximately 2.5 cups of dried beans that expand to roughly 6 cups of cooked beans. 6 cups of cooked beans contains approximately 1,200 calories and 50 to 60 grams of protein. At $1.50 per pound, you are purchasing 50 to 60 grams of complete profile protein for under $2. Compare that to the protein economics of any other food source. Ground beef at $4 per pound delivers roughly 80 grams of protein, but requires refrigeration, has 0 shelf life without freezing, and costs more than twice as much per gram of protein. Canned tuna is a reasonable comparison on protein economics, but lacks the bulk calorie density and has a much shorter shelf life than dried beans. Protein powders and supplements are more expensive per gram than dried beans once you account for the absence of accompanying calories and fiber. Dried beans win the protein economics calculation against virtually every alternative at every price point. And the shelf life. Dried beans properly stored, meaning in an airtight container in a cool, dry location away from light and temperature fluctuations, remain fully edible for 25 to 30 years, the same time frame as white rice. The caveat worth understanding is that very old beans, while perfectly safe to eat, may require longer cooking times. Because the proteins in the seed coat harden over time, beans stored for 10 years will cook, but they may need soaking for longer periods and simmering for longer periods than fresh dried beans. This is a cooking adjustment, not a food safety issue. The beans are not spoiled. They are just older, like everything else. The variety question matters here because food monotony is real and it kills stockpiling compliance. People buy 40 pounds of pinto beans, eat pinto beans for 3 weeks, and stop eating pinto beans for 3 years because they are tired of pinto beans. The solution is simple and inexpensive. Buy variety. Black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, navy beans, chickpeas, red lentils, green lentils, split peas. They all have the same economic profile. They all have the same shelf life. They all deliver the same nutritional value in the rice and beans combination. But they taste different, they cook differently, and they form the base of completely different meals. Lentil soup is not the same experience as black bean stew, which is not the same experience as chickpea curry, which is not the same experience as split pea soup. 4 different meals from the same food category, none of them feeling like repetition if you are rotating through the varieties. Store dried beans in bulk, buy in 5-pound or 10-pound bags from warehouse stores or ethnic grocery stores, which consistently price dried beans lower than mainstream supermarkets because dried beans are a staple food in the cuisines their customers cook, rather than an emergency item bought occasionally by people who saw a preparedness video. An ethnic grocery store in most American cities will sell a 10-pound bag of dried black beans or pinto beans for $4 to $7. That same quantity at a mainstream grocery store often costs 2 to 3 times as much per pound. The third food, rolled oats. In the winter of 2008, at the beginning of the financial crisis that destroyed the savings and employment of millions of American families, food bank directors across the country reported a consistent pattern in the donations that kept their operations running and in the requests they received from the newly food insecure families arriving at their doors for the first time. The donation pattern and the request pattern converged on the same item more than any other: oatmeal, specifically rolled oats in bulk containers. It was the food that families who had navigated hardship before knew to donate because it was the food that families experiencing hardship for the first time most needed to receive. There's a reason for this that goes beyond sentiment or tradition. Rolled oats are the most nutritionally complete grain available at the price point that makes bulk stockpiling financially accessible. A 42-ounce container of rolled oats, the standard canister size, costs approximately $4 to $6 at a mainstream grocery store and contains roughly 30 servings of approximately 150 calories each. In a 50-pound bulk bag from a warehouse store or a bulk food supplier, the price per serving drops to somewhere between 8 and 12 cents. 8 cents per serving. This is the food that costs less per meal than almost any other food that exists in the American market. But the economics are only part of why rolled oats belong in the 4-food system. The nutritional profile is what makes oats irreplaceable. Rolled oats contain protein, more protein per calorie than most other grains, at approximately 17 grams per 100 grams of dry oats. They contain soluble fiber in the form of beta-glucan, which is the specific type of fiber that has been studied extensively for its effects on blood cholesterol, blood sugar regulation, and immune function. The research on oat beta-glucan is among the most consistent in nutritional science. It lowers LDL cholesterol, it slows glucose absorption after eating, and it feeds the gut microbiome in ways that support immune function. Under stress conditions, which is precisely the condition that hard times produce, immune function is the thing that determines whether a person stays functional or collapses. Oats also contain significant amounts of iron, magnesium, zinc, and B vitamins. In the context of the four-food system, oats contribute the specific micronutrients that rice contributes least of, and beans contribute only partially. The combination of rice, beans, and oats covers a substantially broader micronutrient spectrum than any two of those three foods alone. The shelf life of rolled oats in an airtight container is 2 to 4 years, shorter than rice and beans, but still long enough to build a genuine stockpile rather than just a week's supply. The reason for the shorter shelf life is the fat content in oats, which is higher than in white rice and can eventually go rancid, particularly in warm storage conditions. The solution is storage in a cool, dark location, and the use of oxygen absorbers in sealed containers, which can extend the effective shelf life of rolled oats to 5 or more years by preventing the oxidation that causes rancidity. For families under economic pressure, oats solve the breakfast problem in a way that no other food in the four-food system addresses as directly. Rice and beans are lunch and dinner foods in most American cooking contexts. They require cooking time, preparation, and the mental engagement of recipe construction. Oats at 6 in the morning, when children need to be fed before school and adults need to be functional before work, are the simplest, most reliable, most cost-effective solution to the morning meal that exists in the American food economy. A pot of oatmeal requires 5 minutes in one pot. It can be sweetened with a small amount of sugar or honey. It can be made savory with salt and butter. It can have dried fruit added. It can be topped with anything available. It is endlessly adaptable, it fills people up, and it costs less per serving than almost anything else you can put in front of a family at 7 in the morning. The stories from families who navigated the 2008 financial crisis, the Great Depression, and the various regional economic disasters that have punctuated American history over the past century return to oatmeal with a consistency that is itself analytically significant. It is not nostalgia. It is the specific memory of a food that worked, that was there when money was gone, that fed children when nothing else was affordable, that sustained adults through working days when the alternative was not eating. Oatmeal is not glamorous. It is not exciting. It is the food that keeps people going when glamour and excitement are not available, which is precisely what a stockpile food needs to be. The fourth food, cooking oil. This is the one that surprises people. When most people make a list of foods to stockpile, they think about proteins and grains and vegetables. They do not think about fat. And that omission is one of the most consequential mistakes in emergency food planning, because fat is the macronutrient that the human body cannot function without for extended periods. And fat is the specific component that is most absent from the three foods we have already discussed. Rice is almost completely fat-free. Beans are very low in fat. Oats have more fat than rice, but still relatively little. A diet built exclusively on these three foods would be calorie adequate in the short term, but would become progressively deficient in essential fatty acids over weeks and months. Essential fatty acids are called essential because the body cannot synthesize them. They must come from food. They are required for brain function, hormone production, the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins including A, D, E, and K, and the maintenance of cell membrane integrity throughout the body. A person eating nothing but rice, beans, and oats would develop fat deficiency symptoms within a matter of weeks. Difficulty thinking clearly, hormonal disruption, dry skin, immune dysfunction, and eventually more serious neurological and metabolic consequences. Cooking oil solves this problem completely, inexpensively, and with extraordinary shelf-life characteristics that make it ideal for stockpiling. Let us be specific about which oil and why. Refined coconut oil is the optimal choice for long-term stockpiling. Unrefined. Refined is the word that matters here, and it is worth explaining why. Unrefined coconut oil, the kind that smells and tastes like coconuts, has a shelf life of approximately 2 years. Refined coconut oil, which has been processed to remove the impurities that cause spoilage, has a shelf life of 2 to 5 years, and in many documented cases has remained usable well beyond that when stored in cool, dark conditions. Refined coconut oil also has the highest smoke point of any commonly available cooking oil, which means it does not degrade or produce harmful compounds at cooking temperatures that would cause other oils to smoke and break down. It is solid at room temperature in cooler climates, which means a sealed container is effectively airtight just by being closed, and liquid in warm conditions, which means it can be used directly from the container in summer months without any additional preparation. The second option, and the one that is more economical for large quantity stockpiling, is refined olive oil. Not extra virgin, refined. Extra virgin olive oil has flavor compounds and polyphenols that make it superior for fresh applications. But those same compounds make it more susceptible to oxidation and shortens its shelf life. Refined olive oil has had those compounds partially removed through the refining process and delivers a shelf life of approximately 2 to 3 years with excellent stability. At warehouse store prices, a 3-liter can of refined olive oil represents a significant quantity of fat calories at a reasonable price per calorie. The caloric density of olive oil, approximately 120 calories per tablespoon, means that relatively small quantities of oil added to rice and beans dramatically increase the caloric value of a meal and deliver the essential fatty acids the rest of the diet lacks. The third option is vegetable oil or canola oil in large containers. These have shorter shelf lives than coconut oil, typically 1 to 2 years and lower smoke points, but they are the most economically accessible option, and the widest availability makes them the practical choice for many families. On tight container of vegetable oil can be purchased for under $10, representing more than 8,000 calories of fat energy and a sufficient supply of essential linoleic acid to prevent deficiency symptoms. Now here is what cooking oil does to the food system that the previous 3 foods cannot do alone, and this point is important enough that I want you to sit with it for a moment. Cooking oil is the flavor delivery mechanism that makes a stockpile sustainable as an actual eating experience rather than a survival endurance exercise. Fat carries flavor. This is basic food chemistry, and it is also the reason that virtually every cuisine on Earth uses some form of fat as a foundational cooking medium. When you fry onions in oil before adding them to rice and beans, the fat-soluble flavor compounds in the onion become distributed throughout the fat and then throughout the dish in a way that does not happen when you boil onions in water. When you drizzle olive oil over a bowl of oatmeal, you are adding calories and essential fatty acids, but you are also changing the texture and mouthfeel of the oatmeal in a way that makes it more satisfying and more palatable. Think about what this means for stockpile sustainability. The number one reason food stockpiles fail, the reason people buy 6 months of emergency food and then do not eat it until it expires, is that the food is not good enough to eat willingly. It is food you would eat if you had no choice, but not food you choose to eat when something more appealing is available. That problem disappears when cooking oil is part of the system. Rice cooked in salted water and then drizzled with olive oil and whatever spices are available is not an emergency ration. It is a meal. Beans cooked with garlic that was sautéed in coconut oil are not a survival food. They are dinner. The fourth food is the food that makes the other 3 foods into cooking rather than survival. And that distinction matters more than most people understand when they are planning for hard times in a comfortable present. What the 4 foods give you together. Let us run the complete calculation, because numbers are where the reality of this approach becomes undeniable for anyone who's watching this video with the genuine concern of someone who is already feeling economic pressure. A family of 4, spending $100 on the 4-food system, can purchase approximately 25 pounds of white rice, 15 pounds of dried beans in assorted varieties, 10 pounds of rolled oats, and 2 liters of cooking oil. That specific combination contains roughly 150,000 calories, at 2,000 calories per adult per day, and accounting for the lower caloric requirements of children, that quantity feeds a family of 4 for approximately 3 weeks. 3 weeks of genuine food security, not reduced rations, not survival mode, but actual adequate nutrition for $100. And because 3 of those 4 foods have shelf lives measured in decades, none of that purchase is wasted if the hard times do not arrive as soon as anticipated. The investment simply waits. Compare that to $100 spent on freeze-dried emergency meals. At typical retail prices for freeze-dried emergency food, $100 purchases approximately 8 to 12 days of single-person emergency rations at reduced calorie levels. For a family of 4, that represents 2 to 3 days of food. 2 to 3 days versus 3 weeks at the same budget. The mathematical difference between the 2 approaches is not marginal. It is the difference between a family having food security for 3 weeks or having it for less than 3 days. Now I want to address something that the people watching this video are thinking, because it is the objection that always comes up when this specific approach is presented, and it deserves a direct answer rather than a dismissal. The objection is this: rice and beans and oatmeal and cooking oil are boring. They are not the food that people want to eat. They do not represent the variety and pleasure that food is supposed to provide. And building a stockpile around them feels like accepting a diminished life rather than preparing for one. Here is the honest answer to that objection. The people who thought about food pleasure before food security in 2008 were the families standing in food bank lines 4 months later. The people who built their pantries around expensive specialty items and convenience foods were the people who had to choose between keeping the lights on or eating when the paycheck stopped. Economic pressure does not respect food preferences. It does not care about variety or pleasure or the specific organic grain bowls that felt like necessities in the abundant months. It goes directly to the question of what you have and what it costs and how long it lasts. And the families with rice, beans, oats, and oil had something. The families without them had a choice between the grocery store and other bills. But here is the other part of the honest answer, which is that the four-food system is not a prison sentence of dietary monotony. It is a foundation, and what you build on a foundation is entirely up to you. Salt and pepper are pennies. Garlic powder is affordable in bulk. Chili powder, cumin, paprika, oregano, bay leaves, the spices that transform rice and beans into completely different meals from one day to the next, are among the least expensive items in any grocery store when purchased in bulk at restaurant supply stores or ethnic markets. A $10 investment in a basic spice collection turns the Four Food Foundation into dozens of distinct meals. Black beans and rice with cumin and chili powder is a different meal than the same beans with curry powder and coconut oil. Lentils with bay leaves and smoked paprika are different from lentils with ginger and turmeric. The foundation is constant. What you build on it is as varied as you choose to make it. The people who survived the Great Depression without breaking did not survive it by eating nothing but plain rice and beans. They survived it by becoming extraordinarily creative with a limited set of ingredients. Every soup, every stew, every variation on the foundational foods they had available was an exercise in culinary improvisation that produced genuine meals from minimal resources. The skill of cooking well under constraints is not a lesser skill than cooking well with abundance. It is arguably a greater skill, and it produces results that are genuinely satisfying in ways that convenience food never manages to replicate. Here is the section that will generate the most disagreement, and I want to address it with the same precision that the rest of this analysis has applied. There are foods that appear on virtually every emergency preparedness list that do not appear on this list. The reasons they are not here are specific, and they are based on the same framework: caloric density per dollar, shelf life, nutritional contribution, and actual usability under stress conditions. That determined what is on the list. Canned vegetables are the most common omission that generates questions. They do not appear on the four-food list because their caloric density is too low to justify the cost, when budget is the constraint. A can of green beans contains approximately 60 calories and costs $1 to $1.50. That is a terrible caloric investment when you're trying to build food security with limited funds. Vegetables have enormous nutritional value when they are part of an otherwise adequate diet. As the primary expenditure of a limited food stockpile budget, they are the wrong investment. Small quantities of dried vegetables, sun-dried tomatoes, dried mushrooms, dried onion flakes, provide flavor and some micronutrient value at better economics. But the bulk of the budget should not go to low-calorie canned vegetables. Canned meats, tuna, salmon, chicken, Spam, are a reasonable supplementary item but not a foundation food because of their cost per calorie relative to the four primary foods. Canned tuna at $2 a can delivers roughly 150 calories and 25 grams of protein. Beans at roughly 30 cents per equivalent serving deliver similar protein and more calories. For the specific scenario of building food security with limited money, beans win the economics every time. Canned meats are a supplement to the Four Food Foundation, not a replacement for any element of it. Freeze-dried complete meals, the bucket systems marketed specifically to the preparedness community, represent the most expensive way to purchase emergency calories that exists in the American market. They are not on the list for the same reason that buying a prepackaged emergency car kit from a gas station is not the rational response to car safety. The convenience premium is enormous, and the underlying components can be purchased separately for a fraction of the bundled price. The companies selling those systems are not selling food. They are selling anxiety management packaged as preparedness. The markup over the cost of the actual food is extraordinary. And the families who need food security most are the families who can least afford that markup. Sugar, honey, and salt are worth discussing as supplementary items that dramatically increase the usability of the Four Food Foundation without significant cost. A 10-pound bag of sugar costs $5 to $7 and has an indefinite shelf life when stored dry. Salt in bulk costs almost nothing and is essential for food preservation and palatability. Honey has a literal infinite shell life. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs that was still edible and provides both properties. These are not the four foods, but they are the specific additions that make the four foods work as a complete food system rather than a bare survival ration, and they are cheap enough that they do not compete meaningfully with the primary budget allocation. Multivitamins deserve mention in this context because the four food system, while nutritionally superior to most emergency food approaches, does not cover the complete micronutrient spectrum at optimal levels. Specifically, fat-soluble vitamins A and D are limited in the four food system. Vitamin C, which is absent from all four foods, becomes a concern over extended periods. Scurvy was a documented consequence of the most extreme food restriction scenarios in historical economic crises, and it develops on a timeline of weeks to months of complete vitamin C deprivation. A bottle of multivitamins purchased alongside the four food staples, policy for under $10. It is the fifth item on the list that does not make the list because it is not food. But it is the specific supplement that closes the gap the four foods leave open. I want to close with a dimension of this topic that the analytical framework alone cannot fully capture. Because food security in hard times is not purely an economics or a nutrition problem. It is a human problem. And the human dimension of the food choices people make under economic pressure shapes outcomes that go far beyond the simple question of whether bodies are fed. There is a man named James who worked for 23 years at a manufacturing plant in Ohio that closed in 2009. He lost his job in March of that year. He had 3 children, a mortgage that was underwater, and a savings account that contained less than 4 months of basic expenses. He describes the months that followed with a specificity that only genuine scarcity produces. He describes the specific calculations he made at the grocery store, the mental arithmetic of calories per dollar that he had never needed to perform before and could not stop performing once he started. He describes the way his children's faces told him whether he had succeeded or failed that week, whether dinner was enough or not quite enough, whether the family was going to make it through the year intact or not. What James had going for him, and what he credits with the family's survival of those 2 years without losing the house or going hungry, was a grandmother who had lived through the Depression and who had, over the years of abundance before the crisis, taught him what she called the real pantry, not the pantry of things you like to eat, the pantry of things that would keep you alive and keep your family together when the things you like to eat were not available. Rice in a 5-gallon bucket with a lid, dried beans in gallon jars, oatmeal in bulk bags from the restaurant supply store, oil in large containers bought on sale. The real pantry. He fed his family from that pantry for portions of a full year. He has his grandmother's recipe for black bean soup, which he describes as one of the best things he has ever eaten, not despite the circumstances in which he learned to love it, but partly because of them, written on an index card that he has kept in his kitchen ever since, not as a memorial to hard times, as a reminder of what actually matters in the long run when the things that seem to matter before turn out not to be the things that matter at all. The families who built genuine food security before they needed it did not do it because they were certain hard times were coming. They did it because they understood something specific about the relationship between preparation and freedom. When you have a pantry stocked with the 4 foods, you're not afraid of a bad month. You're not afraid of a job loss that takes longer to replace than expected. You're not afraid of an unexpected expense that wipes out the grocery budget for 2 weeks. You have already solved those problems before they arrived. And the specific psychological freedom that comes from having solved them, the reduction in the baseline anxiety that most American families are carrying right now about money and food and whether they can keep everything together, is not a small thing. It is one of the most significant quality of life improvements a family can make for under $200. $200. At current food prices, $200 spent on the 4 food system, white rice, dried beans, rolled oats, and cooking oil in appropriate bulk quantities, produces somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks of foundational food security for a family of 4. 6 to 10 weeks of knowing that whatever happens, whatever the economy does, whatever the job market does, whatever the unexpected does, the food is handled. The children will eat, the family will function, the foundation is solid. Everything else in the preparedness world, every expensive system and complicated program and freeze-dried bucket and emergency ration kit, is built on the same foundation that your great-grandmother's tea has navigated genuine hard times, has returned to when the complexity was stripped away by necessity. Rice, beans, oats, oil. The rest, with the limited money that too many American families have available for this specific purpose, is a waste. Not because the other options have no value, but because the foundational options have so much more value per dollar that spending money on anything else before the foundation is fully built is the wrong sequence. Build the foundation first. Add everything else later when the foundation is in place and the budget allows. But build the foundation first. Because the families who had it when they needed it are the families who made it through. And the families who spent the food budget on expensive alternatives that looked more like security but were not are the families standing in the food bank line hoping the volunteers had thought more clearly about this than they did. The petroleum engineering physics of the Great Depression and the 2008 financial crisis and every economic contraction that human communities have navigated do not negotiate with food preferences or marketing narratives. They present the specific reality of what a human body needs to function and what that reality costs. And whether you have arranged your pantry around that reality or around the illusion that hard times will never arrive in a form that requires you to take them seriously. 4 foods: rice, beans, oats, oil. The foundation that does not fail when everything else does. Build it before you need it, because when you need it, building it will already be too late to matter. The mistake that costs the most. There's a specific mistake that appears so consistently in the way American families approach food security that it deserves its own section, separate from the general discussion of what to stockpile and why. The mistake is the sequence problem, and the sequence problem is this. Most families who decide to take food preparedness seriously do so by going online, reading about preparedness, watching videos like this one, and then making a single large purchase that is designed to solve the food security question permanently in one transaction. That single large purchase is almost always wrong, not because the items are wrong, but because the psychology of a single large purchase produces a specific behavioral outcome that destroys the value of the purchase itself. When you spend $200 on a preparedness purchase that represents a significant fraction of your discretionary budget, you psychologically file that purchase under solved. The food security problem has been addressed, the pantry is stocked, the anxiety is managed, and the specific items that were purchased to solve the problem, which require some maintenance, some rotation, some awareness of what is in the pantry and in what quantities, gradually stop being tracked because the purchase was a one-time event rather than an ongoing practice. 3 years later, when the circumstances that motivated the original purchase have arrived, or when the economic pressure has intensified to the point where the pantry actually needs to function as a food security resource, you open the storage containers and find that the oats have gone rancid, because they were not stored with oxygen absorbers and the container was not airtight. You find that the cooking oil bought in glass bottles has gone off, because glass does not protect oil from light oxidation the way dark plastic or metal containers do. You find that the beans are there and the rice is there, and the quantities are approximately what you remember purchasing, but nothing has been used and nothing has been rotated, and the pantry is technically present but functionally neglected. The alternative to the one-time purchase problem is the integrated approach, and it is the approach that every family that has navigated extended economic pressure describes when asked how they kept the pantry functional over time. Buy a little more than you need every grocery trip, not dramatically more, not an extra $100 per visit, just a little more. 1 extra 5-pound bag of rice when it goes on sale, an extra pound of dried lentils when you are already buying lentils, an extra large container of oats when the warehouse store prices them attractively. The pantry builds over months of normal grocery shopping rather than in a single purchase event, and because the pantry builds as part of normal shopping, it also rotates as part of normal cooking. You use from the back of the pantry and buy for the front. The oldest items get cooked first. Nothing expires untouched because everything is being used as part of regular meal planning. This is not just practical advice. It is the specific advice that the people who kept their families fed through the 2008 crisis and through the COVID supply chain disruptions of 2020 and through every other economic shock of the past 2 decades give when you ask them what they did differently. They did. Kitchen with depth. A kitchen that always had more than a few days of food in it because buying ahead was part of the routine. Not a survival system. A shopping habit. The difference between those two framings is the difference between something you do once in response to anxiety and something you do continuously as an expression of competence. Here's the dimension of the 4-food stockpile that most people miss entirely until they actually start using it, at which point it becomes the most immediately practical consideration of all. Every one of the 4 foods requires water to prepare. White rice requires water to cook. Dried beans require water to soak and to boil. Rolled oats require water to cook. Cooking oil does not require water, but every meal made with the other 3 does. In most scenarios where a food stockpile is relevant, economic pressure, temporary disruption, local emergency, water is available from the municipal tap at normal quantities. The cooking water question is not a crisis, but in specific scenarios where the food stockpile becomes critical precisely because normal infrastructure is disrupted, water availability matters enormously. A family with 60 pounds of rice and 30 pounds of beans and no water to cook them has food that they cannot eat. The specific water requirement for cooking the 4 foods at standard daily quantities for a family of 4 is approximately 2 to 3 gallons per day for cooking and basic food preparation. Not for drinking, that is additional, just for cooking the food. This is the number that changes how you think about water storage alongside food storage. The standard emergency preparedness recommendation of 1 gallon per person per day is based on minimum drinking requirements. It does not account for the cooking water that the 4-food system requires. A family of 4 building genuine food security needs to think in terms of 4 gallons per person per day minimum, 1 for drinking, and 3 divided among the family for cooking, if they want to use their food stockpile as intended. The good news about the water equation is that the same economic approach that works for food works for water. Commercial water storage barrels, 55-gallon food-grade plastic drums designed for long-term storage, are available at farm supply stores for $20 to $30 each. 2 drums, stored with a simple annual rotation schedule, costs under $100 and covers a family of 4 for approximately 1 month. The families who had both food and water when they needed them were not the families who had elaborate filtration systems and expensive equipment. They were the families who had filled plastic barrels and bought rice in bulk. The conversation nobody is having. There's a specific conversation that should be happening in the political and economic commentary about the food insecurity that is building in American households right now, and it is largely not happening. The conversation that should be happening is the one about the gap between what people are being told about the economy and what they are experiencing at the grocery store. The official narrative about American food prices is that inflation has cooled. And by the specific measures that economists use, the Consumer Price Index, the Producer Price Index, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, that narrative contains truth. Inflation rates have declined significantly from their 2022 peaks. But here is what those normalized inflation rates do not address. They measure the rate of change in prices, not the prices themselves. Inflation of 3% this year after 8% last year and 7% the year before means prices are still going up, just more slowly. The cumulative effect of several years of elevated food inflation is not erased by a lower rate. The grocery receipt for the family in Phoenix is still 60% higher than it was in 2020. The normalization of the inflation rate does not reduce the bill. The families watching this video are not experiencing a normalized economy. They are experiencing the accumulated weight of years of price increases in a context where wages have not kept pace with the costs that matter most: housing, food, healthcare, and childcare. These are the categories where prices have increased most and where the political consensus has the least to offer by way of relief. This is the environment in which the 4-food system is not an extreme measure or a prepper response to apocalyptic scenarios. It is a rational, practical, financially grounded response to an economic reality that tens of millions of American families are navigating right now without the tools or the framework to navigate it effectively. The 4 foods are not for people who believe civilization is that the grocery bill is not going down, that the paycheck is not keeping up, and that the gap between those 2 facts requires a practical response rather than a political argument. The practical response is what this entire video has been about. Build the foundation. 4 foods. The foods that kept families alive and functional through the worst economic contractions in American history. The foods that the science of nutrition, the mathematics of caloric density, and the documented evidence of what actually works under extended economic pressure all converge on. Rice, beans, oats, oil. Not as a statement of despair, as a statement of competence, because the families who build this foundation are not the families who are afraid of hard times. They are the families who are ready for them, and ready is the specific posture that transforms economic pressure from a crisis into a problem with a solution that is already in place.